Good evening, welcome back to Tactics Talk. I am your host, Adam Thornton, and we're back again. Do we have false hope just now? I'm not sure. We definitely have hope. We're back again for another season on Tactics Talk. We're back again, hoping that we'll be able to do regular shows on Tactics Talk, and there wouldn't be, I was going to say one a month, but one every 6 months. I think we might have got to under the last manager. We're back with hope, I think, is the key. Cautious hope, I would say. Joining me as well, to hopefully share in that hope is none other than Ali Bain. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, mate. It's felt like the quickest summer ever in football, which I don't know is a good or a bad thing. I guess it's been good that there's been a lot of noise off the park to distract us from the end of last season, and try and rid some of those memories of yeah that that curtailed the season. But no, I'm for sure looking forward to the season coming up. There's obviously been lots of great chat about the team, the style, and which will give us something to chat about today. But yeah, just looking forward to seeing the team play some more, really, and not having sort of shoulder height quirky video footage that we got at the weekend. Actually seeing a wee bit more substantive stuff over the next couple of months will be good.
That would be great. I'm trying my best not to get ahead of myself. I think because for years on this show, we have advocated the style of play that, in theory, Russell Martin brings, which is positional play, attacking possession football, clearly defined patterns, high defensive line, ball playing centre halves, forwards that know what they're doing, midfielders that can run and have seen a football. In theory, that is um, the type of football I think both of us like to see, and it's what we've wanted Rangers to be. However, we know that just because you hire a manager that can play that doesn't mean it's going to happen. As far as Rangers are concerned, there's so many other factors at play: the opposition that we face, the league we play in, the players that we have, the players that we would like to leave but or we would like to sell that haven't been sold, the players that we can afford, all these type of things. So in theory, and looking at it with my heart, I'm trying to be optimistic. Um, as I said, I think maybe not on maybe on the show with Joshua. I think I said at the time of his appointment or just after, the style of play is the thing that I really want. Whether we have the personality, Russell Martin, whether he can cope with the pressure of this up here, whether we get everything that we need done, whether we get the luck of the bounce, all that sort of stuff. I'm still very much on the fence with, but for the purposes of this show, for the purposes of these shows, as we know, we talk about what happens on the pitch, we talk about the theory behind the coaching, we talk about the players, their skills, their strengths, their weaknesses, all that sort of stuff. So I'm trying my best. I'm usually optimistic. Last season bullied the life out of me, and I was from about now just relentlessly negative about it, much to the annoyance of quite a lot of people. So we're going to be cautiously optimistic. We're not going to make any grand proclamations on these shows. These shows are going to be, I'll steal your thunder a little bit, Ali, but I guess these first couple of shows are going to be mostly theory based. We're going to go through how we think, why teams play, why teams use positional play, why we think Russell Martin uses it. We're going to look at how does positional play actually work during a game. That will be on the next show, and then at the end, on the third show, we're going to look at how does positional play affect your ability to defend, which is probably one of the things that I think most people are concerned about with regards to Russell Martin playing a high line. That footage you mentioned at the weekend where we lost a pretty sloppy goal. It seems to be a theme with Russell Martin's teams, certainly from his time last season at Southampton. So we're going to do it in a bit of a three-parter, and we'll see how things change and evolve throughout. Obviously, there'll be some signings coming in, there'll be some players leaving that will probably evolve that as we go. But I think that's really what we're looking for, isn't it, Ali? We want to see a plan. We started doing these shows January 2018, I think it was, and it was a pretty dark time. But by the time May came around and Steven Gerrard, these shows I looked forward to these shows every week, even if we weren't winning, because there were clear building blocks there. There was, okay, here's what season one is. Season two went good until it didn't, and then it fell apart. But season three, you could sort of see the culmination of a plan. I think that's all I really want to see from Rangers. Obviously, we have to win and we have to win quickly, but for the purposes of these shows, if I'm seeing a clear plan in place and I can see what the team's trying to do, then that gives me some comfort, and it's not something we've seen for 4 years now. I think is that fair?
Absolutely. And listen, ultimately, I think this boils down to, um, the bigger picture of what the club wants to become, right? If we want to be a modern football club and we want to be a club that, regards itself as, operating in an industry level above where we have in the past at all aspects of the operation, then from a footballing perspective, I think as fans we need to get on board with that as well. Now, whether we agree with it, like it, whether it sort of fits our vibe, that's another, I guess, internal discussion for every supporter. But I guess for us, what we've always tried to do is just evaluate what we see. We've tried to look at this through the lens of, well, what do we think they're trying to do, and then evaluate on that. Well, what does it actually look like? And I guess the toughest part we've had over the last couple of years, and at points we'll have this year as well, is we don't really know, right? We're just sort of surmising, we're guessing based on our experience and our knowledge, and trying to sort of connect the dots. We're not in the team meetings, obviously. We don't know. We don't have any preface on really what's going to happen. What I do know from my own experience of this type of, or this style of play, is it does take a long time, and supporters don't want to hear that. And
No.
it's apples and oranges to compare football clubs and teams and managers and styles, but you could argue it probably took Luis Enrique a year, and that's with some of the best players in the world,
Yeah.
to get to where they're at now. So this is for the long term, and I guess that's why the club's trying to give Martin everything to be successful from the get go. This isn't a right, Russell, go prove yourself for 6 months and we'll see if you're worth the money. They fully believe in this guy, and I would like to think down the road that there'll be a body of evidence to suggest whether it's successful or not out with the results, because ultimately that's what this style of play is. It's a way of winning. This isn't just some art project that we're going to say, oh, they made some lovely moves today. We are always, as every level of football is, you're dictated by, are you winning and losing games? And if you're going to delude yourself by saying, well, we played lovely football today, um, I just don't think Martin would be here if that was a consideration he had. I think that's been fully discussed, and he's well aware of it, having been a player at the club, that you can't say those sound bites anymore. And I think you're starting to see that across football, right? I don't know many managers now that do the old Roberto Martinez, what you saw isn't what reality is. So yeah, that's I guess when I'm hopeful, and all the sound bites so far, mate. I don't know what you think about this, but certainly all the sound bites I've heard from Martin thus far are, he is rooted in reality. He is very clear and understands what this is. The big challenge is going to be when the going gets tough. Are we still hearing those same sound bites? That's the big challenge, I guess.
You took the words out of my mouth there, because I totally agree. I think managers like Russell Martin, um, some other tactically minded managers that we might have had in the past, or even that we've heard of before, they're more than happy to talk through how things are going when things are going well, or when there's no evidence that things aren't going well, as in pre-season, um, middle of November after yet another draw. I'm not sure they're going to be as forthright about how things work, and my style does this and my style does that. So I think you're spot on. The alignment piece, I think for me, just before we dig into the actual body of the show, I think the alignment piece above is obviously something, again, we've spoken about on here for years, that we didn't have people in place that can define football and structures, all that sort of stuff. Um, from what Kevin Philwell said in his introductory, wasn't a press conference, was it? Introductory statement, I think, on the website, or whatever, was clear to me. They want to play attacking football. They want to play this. This is the type of football that they want to play. The exact football that Russell Martin does. So that gives me a little bit of comfort. We'll only really know how much they want to do that when Russell Martin leaves, hopefully successfully, and they decide to hire someone else. That transition again, I'm not trying to chase someone out the door before they've even started, but that transition piece to me is really interesting because if they then go from Russell Martin to somebody that plays on the counter attack or whatever, and you've built a squad that suits attacking possession, positional play, that's a little bit of a concern, I guess. So, thinking ahead there, hopefully 2 or 3 years in the future and not 2 or 3 months, but that could be something to keep an eye on. But they've certainly nailed their colours to the mast, and it sounds like everyone is aligned that this is the way to play. For that reason, I'm less concerned about recruitment than some others because signing players that Russell Martin has worked with before, or signing players that the director of football or recruitment director have known before, that kind of makes sense to me because it could all be aligned under the one banner. If you want to play this way and you've hired a manager that plays this way, it's maybe not a surprise that you like the similar players, I guess. So, yeah, that's one to watch out for. I reserve the right to moan about recruitment on the 1st of September, like anyone else, if not way before. Okay, so like I said, we're hoping this will be 2 or 3 episodes, relatively short, and we're going to kick off where you're going to talk us through the first body of the first episode. I guess is basically what is positional play, why do coaches use it.
So I think let's go back to when this sort of became a bit of a new thing, right? So probably 2008, 2009, this is sort of bubbling under the surface. A lot of Barcelona would be the biggest example, but it was happening across the world and a few different South American teams, certainly more Latin countries. It was seen as, well, we've all saw possession football before, but we haven't really saw it like this. And I think what we've saw since then to today is, I would actually argue, it's flipped now that this is the norm, right? And what I mean by that is there's more managers who use positional play than would probably say up front or quantify it as that. I just think there's a far broader spectrum now as to what it is, what it looks like. So I think what's important to first of all establish, though, when we talk about positional play, the actual original terminology of it, it's basically a comfort blanket for players. It's a coach saying to the players, my role on this team, as well as just picking it and training you every day, is I'm going to scout the opposition, look at where there's holes or weaknesses in their general defensive setup, and I'm going to then support you guys by putting you in positions that allow your strengths to come out. Right now, that could be symmetrical, that could be lopsided, that could be based on the numbers the opposition have. If it's 4-4-2, 4-5-1, whatever it is, where we're going to position our people on the field. Now, the reason that a lot of coaches went, or certainly adopted, that style initially was they wanted to reduce the amount of running around players did in possession, right? So they had more energy when they were maybe making an attacking action or maybe making a sprint back the way. They're trying to reduce the amount of also mental anxiety amongst players and that feel of, am I doing the right thing? Am I where I should be? Right? So if I'm the, let's say, left winger, and I know I need to be on the outside of the field at all times and stretching the play, then there's less thought process going on as to, well, do I need to hug the touchline or do I need to stay high? If I know I need to be here the whole time, I can then start thinking about other things. And if we talk about the elite level of the sport, something as simple as that and removing that thought process from a player can hopefully simplify it moving forward. So without making this sound sort of overly simplistic, the general structure of positional play is moving from starting positions. So for example, if it's 4-3-3 you're playing, which would be the traditional formation that we'd look at, do both fullbacks go high and be the width? Do both fullbacks come inside? Does one go, does one stay? Are we going sort of asymmetrical, going towards the right-hand side, going towards the left-hand side? There are loads of different ways you can cut this up and sort of splice it. So I guess that's the first thing I'm looking forward to over this first sort of body of games is, what does this actually look like? What's the shape look like? If it is 4-3-3, then where do the players stand? And we saw a little bit about that in the Bruges game. I'll be honest, I think there was more. We saw more in that game about the defending. I mean, he'd only really had them a week to 10 days, so you saw more about pressing. I think in that match. So, like I say, that's the first thing for me. I'm not sure what general thoughts you have on that, May, or what you want to see from the team. But for me, that's my big thing: is what does this actually look like on the field?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's about having a structure in place. I understand some people's what's the word? Dismay? Is that the word? I don't know. Or some people complaining about how football is robotic these days, and you've taken out the individual brilliance and blah blah blah. And I do kind of agree with it to an extent. However, when we see what we had last year, or even the year before, when there's no individual brilliance and no shape and structure, it's like a sort of double negative, or limited individual brilliance, I should say. It's a bit of a double negative for me. So ultimately, I agree. Yeah, obviously with everything you've said, I think having a clear idea, I think having a clear idea is great. I'm sure every coach will say they've got a clear idea, but getting on the pitch is another thing. And does your clear idea suit the club you're playing with, the league you're playing in, the players that you've got? I think it's absolutely fine to have an approach and be dogmatic. But if it doesn't suit, then
Right.
what's the point? So I'm basically looking for something that works without being rude about it. This is the type of football I like to watch. Choreographed, lots of lovely movements, lovely sweet moves that result in someone hitting the byline, please, for the love of God, and a cutback, which results in an easy finish. That's pretty much what I like to see. I don't mind about that. This is that. I think
Mm-hmm.
if we can execute it properly, we've already seen with those highlights of the weekend there, the goal that Danilo scored, nice little give and go with Dowling and Diomande. So the right hand winger and the right side of number 8, Diomande then breaks beyond the defensive line, cuts it back, and Danilo finishes. Those type of we should be scoring that goal every week, really,
Right.
because we've got better quality players. It doesn't massively rely on breaking down a team, I don't think, or a team that plays a high line to get in beyond. It's all about movement and pace and being willing to run and go off the ball. So that's the type of thing I want to see, if I can be simplistic about it. Yes, once we get into it and we actually see how it works for Rangers, I'll be really interested to see um, build structures, for example. Like, does he have the centre backs split and try and build through that way? Does he get the number 6 more involved in him? He's the one that drops into the back line and forms a 3, or does he stay a bit higher? All that sort of stuff. And I would like to see, which I think we'll probably come on to as well, I'd really like to see how we choreograph more of those moves in the final third, because it's not just getting to the byline and that moving and getting through. There's a whole number of patterns of play that will be worked on that we can do. I want to see attackers not having to come to the halfway line to pick up the ball and try and beat 4 men before scoring. I want to see wide players staying in their positions, number 9 staying in his position, number 8s with clear license to roam, whether it's in the half spaces outside or in the middle of the box. I want to see all that working in unison and be a pattern that you can say that's clearly been rehearsed and that's clearly something that was seen from the training pitch, because that's the name of the game. I think what you do at the weekend is great, but building that pattern and during the week makes the weekend easier. Every player says that. So just turning up off the cuff and trying to win a game is great, but it doesn't work all the time, because other teams that are less fancied than you will have a rehearsed pattern of what they want to do as well. And just because you've got better individuals doesn't mean you're going to win every time if you try and turn these games into basketball games or roulette. So yeah, I think I understand what we're aiming for. I do have concerns, I guess, about how we translate it into something that makes sense for us. But I do like some of the sound bites he's talking about in terms of intensity. I do like what's he said about dark arts and tactical fouling. and then wanting more athletic profiles at the back. That's improvements, I think, from where he's been before. So yeah, I think that's my understanding of, I guess, why he uses positional play at a very high level, and what I hope can come for us.
Just to further that structure point, something flagged up, and I remember we did a show a couple of months back there about Farioli at Ajax, and there was one of the
Yes.
things in the notes that I'd picked up at the time where they'd spoke about the different types of possession, right? So clearly, right, obviously the way you keep the ball in the final third is going to be different than how you build it for the goalkeeper, the pressure, how close you are to goal, all those things. But one of the things that I think we'll definitely see, and this is if anyone goes on and looks for clips of Southampton, you'll see this too. The name of the game is trying to get your team in the opposition's half to live in their half. So getting the back line up, so crossing the halfway line in structural control of the ball. So when we talk about structural control, that's being able to pass back and forwards, right? So again, these things sound like, I'm being patronising when I say it, but it's a thing, right? If we give the ball to Raskin 10 yards in front of centre backs, he is naturally disconnected with the striker, just the distance. And conversely, if we had a
Yep.
70-yard diagonal all the way over to, I don't know, Cortez on the left wing with no fullback underneath him in the back line 50 yards away, then he's no one he can drop it back to should he be pressed with two people. So trying to cross the halfway line with numerical superiority is an important one, because when we talk about this phrase, and this a sort of central tenet to positional plays, you hear this phrase a lot, the spare man, right? That
Yeah. Yep.
whether it be a third midfielder, whether it be a striker coming in, whether it, we saw in those Bruges friendlies, like the fullbacks sprinting away inside and becoming extra men in midfield, whoever that extra player is at any specific time, that doesn't unlock the door, right? That doesn't mean, well, we've got four midfielders, they've got three, so naturally we'll just go through and score. That obviously that's not how football works. But when I spoke earlier about removing that anxiety from players, there's going to be two or three players in the team in any given week whose job it is to dribble by people, right? So if that means that, let's say we want Asgard to be more of a central dribbler, I have no idea if this is the case, but let's say it is, right? The rules with him will be different, because you want to get out of his way. You don't want to go near the ball. You want to actually run away from
Yeah.
it to give him more space. Whereas if it's Diamande, who's more combination play, you want to be combining with him and actually drawing defenders towards the ball. So there's other spaces elsewhere that we can expose with a little third man run and find his spare runners off the back shoulder. And again, all of that comes from good ball control, structural control with numbers up in the opposition's half. Ergo, you're going to have to play with a high back line. There's no way around it. If you want to be a good possession team, you have to take risks in the defensive side. We can't have everything, right? You can't have a, 12th player in the park. It doesn't work, right? So I guess that's the sort of follow on in positional players. When we talk about the possession, and Martin's saying there about playing with a purpose, what that actually looks like isn't going left and right 47 times. I think a lot of people get confused when they talk about possession football. Positional play is going right directly through the middle of the team on the ground,
Yep.
connecting the dots from the centre back to the midfielders to the strikers. The easiest route to goal. If you can't do that, then it splinters off as to, okay, we penetrate the midfield and then we go wide, because that's, the natural next ball movement. And when we're in wide areas, can we dribble diagonally through the team, because that's the quickest route to goal, rather than dribbling around them all the time or having to attack around an opposition when you just allow them to drop back in the block and guard the box. So these are things that we'll need to see happen more before we give live examples. But again, that's the things I'm looking for in these early couple of games is how do we actually progress the ball? Who are the guys that we're giving it to most? And are we using them effectively? Are we getting them in a position where they can affect a game, rather than, as we've said ad nauseum, Raskin receiving it between the centre backs, 80 yards for goal, and not being able to go anywhere, right? He's too good a footballer to have him playing in our half. Let's get him up in the oppositions.
I think that's a key point. I think that's probably worth just having a bit of a chat through, and it's the difference between, or I think the difference between the fundamentals of a framework and then how you apply them, I guess. So like everyone everyone says Pep Guardiola is so rigid and never evolves, which is just if anybody goes and watches Barcelona 2008 and then goes and watches Bayern Munich 2013 and then goes and watches whatever the hell that was last year. Um, it's three completely different teams, three completely different.
Right.
I don't want to say playing styles, but it probably is, and I think that's the confusion. But I guarantee you, everything that we spoke about there and the fundamentals of positional play, which are, as I understand it, you might tell me I'm talking rubbish, but creating numerical superiority in key zones, occupying those five vertical spaces on the pitch, so left wing, half space, centre of the pitch, half space, right wing, occupying those with width and depth, which I think is a different thing. Trying to pin opposition so that you can create space elsewhere. Maximising space between the lines, or minimising, I guess, like you said, playing closer together if you can to create that space. Breaking the lines, whether it's third man runs, rotations, wall passes, just a player beating a man, and just making sure every player has a purpose on the pitch. All of those things will be relevant from Barcelona 2008 up to Man City 2025 with completely different players and a completely different physical makeup of the team, technical makeup. But all of those things will still be happening, or I think I maybe mentioned five or six things there. At least the vast majority of them will still be happening. So that's where it's different, I think, and why it's tricky to analyse how a coach does in one team, even if they are properly idealistic, because a whole other team playing in a whole other environment isn't necessarily going to play the same way, but you will see some patterns. So is that relevant? Do you think? And again, tailoring to our skills that we've got. We know, for example, we mentioned Asgard there. We know he seems to be a ball carrier and he can hit shots. He's maybe not going to be someone who can drop deep and pick the ball up. And I'm going to assume, I've literally not seen a minute of him play for us, but I'm going to assume he's not a thread the needle type of player. Diamande, opposite maybe, or slightly different, like you said, can take the ball in back to goal, can create space that way using his body, whereas Asgard's more likely to create space by beating a man and driving forwards. So you then tailor your situation to that. Can Jeffrey play inverted? I would say possibly not, or it's maybe not coming natural. So on that side of the pitch, when Jeffrey's playing, you have the fullback going on the outside, and then you maybe want a winger that comes on the inside, but you're still occupying the zones. It's just with different players. Is that fair? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and listen, this is the beauty of it, right? But when you're how you approach this theory is brilliant, right, and is lovely until you start putting human beings in the places,
Yeah.
because and listen, I find this a lot, and this is something I speak with coaches in my previous jobs about, and that some I've had to learn working with players as well. There's an idea, right, that well, if I just tell them, right, if I can just tell this player to do this thing more often, then he'll immediately start doing it, and everything will be great. Like that's not how footballers work. They work on instinct, right? They work on their confidence level. They work on what worked 5 minutes ago, right? So until we start having time out so you can get in a coach in the game, like live coaching, then a lot of this you are relying on players. So we're going through some pretty complex ideas, right? Sort of big picture, big structures. Players don't think like that. They think as individuals, obviously, right? How am I impacting the game? So when we talk about the roles they've got, it has to be predicated on what they're good at, because otherwise they're not going to feel comfortable, natural, confident doing it. And if you are planning to progress them and move them forward as players, it's probably not going to be doing something they've either never done before or they feel extremely uncomfortable doing. So I guess that's the big part when we talk about those relationships is can we get something together where those players work? And if the answer's no, then we're probably going to have to get other players. And listen, I think that's been the issue we've had in the past as well. Is we've tried to. So as a management staff and as a club, I think there's been a lot of repurposing going on the last 3 to 4 seasons, certainly. So I think now we need to get, and Martin's mentioned this a wee bit as well about getting specialists, right? Now that's not to say, okay, Jeffy does this and he can only do that ever, right?
Yeah,
But if we're saying Jeffy's main strength is his pace, his athleticism, his ability to get up and down the park, can he carry the ball over distances? Again, probably with the athleticism piece. What he is absolutely not is a possession based, coming inside, connecting. So if we're looking at this saying, is there a way that he can play on that left hand side? Absolutely. But then it needs to be in synergy with the boys around him. The same
yeah,
way that on the right hand side, if we've got, let's say, a right sided centre back who is better at carrying the ball into midfield, have we got the midfielders around him that have got the discipline to play there and aren't just going to keep running around everywhere and make things too hectic and not bring out the best in him? So yes, it's about those individual specialists, but again, it's having them work with the other players around them. And this is why, again, this idea of, oh, well, we'll just get through on that position. That's why this style's risky, because you can't, there is no just get through. Like, everyone needs to be comfortable in all the positions because it's such a team focused setup that, all of them need to be able to do the jobs you're asking or it's going to fall apart. And that's quite rightly why there's such a anxiety around this style. A lot of managers revert to the, okay, let's just have a setup, and we see this a lot in Scotland. We'll play without the ball. We're stronger without it, right? And we'll just live on counter attacks. We're
yeah.
better when the opposition have it, and we try and win it off them. And ultimately, mate, it's what Klopp built a career on, right? So this isn't just it's a little club mentality. There's big clubs that think like that too. They've just got better players. This style typically suits bigger clubs with bigger budgets who can afford more and better players. But again, relative to Rangers, I think this is a style we should absolutely be looking at and should have done long, long before now, based on the relative strength we have as a club and a player pool in our division. So I certainly don't look at this as anything to be worried about. I think a
No,
lot of people are I think, getting overly concerned about the turnovers and the possession and losing the ball. Jesus Christ, if that's the case, look how many times we turned the ball over last year with
I know.
a 5-3-2 direct style. So, spare me any worries about this style being overly intricate if that's the case, So,
I was
so
I was
yeah,
I, I was actually laughing at that the other day when people are like, "Oh, see, this is what I was worried about." Did you see us try and defend last year? Like, I'm not, I hate the whole, I hate the whole. This player isn't great, but he's better than what we had last year. Better than the absolute horror show of last year.
right.
Great, wow. But it's probably quite pertinent here because if you're going to improve attacking, and you're going to improve your ball possession, you're going to improve how you attack, all that sort of stuff, and you improve your defending as well, but it's still not amazing, then surely overall that's a benefit. So yeah, I do find that quite funny. The other thing I always wonder about with people is these sort of preconceived ideas that possession play doesn't work in Scotland or passing out from the back doesn't work in Scotland, when there is, I think I've said this before on shows, a very huge example of it working over the last 8, 9 seasons in our division. That is what we're trying to beat. So it always confuses me that, oh, that's not going to work up here. Okay, but it is working. So would we would we yeah, yeah. But I guess talking about taking taking quotes out of isolation. There's a lot of that, particularly in pre-season. The manager said the team's going to look very different to this the next week to this week, and now it doesn't. Let's burn the ground and all that
Right.
sort of stuff. But we love to take things out of isolation. And there's a Joe Rothwell quote which either could could go either way, I think, where he said there's no pointless passes in the system. So I wanted to just touch on that, I guess, before we finish. We're going to go into, in the next episode, we're going to go into how positional play actually operates in the game. I think we've maybe introduced a little bit of that, but we'll go into more detail on that on next week's show. But I just wanted to talk about that because that's one of those quotes that is entirely subjective, I think, because something you said there about being patient and waiting for the pass to appear is key. So no pointless passes in this system means I take that to mean, for example, if Joe Rothwell is standing with the ball in the centre circle and the actors ahead of him or the players ahead of him are not in the positions that they've rehearsed or are not in those agreed areas of the pitch, I'm not passing that ball through because that's a pointless pass.
Right.
Passing it back the way, everybody will say that's a pointless pass. Not really, because that's you starting again and giving the attackers the opportunity to get themselves into those positions. So I think I'm guilty of it as well. In my head, I think pointless pass is just passing side to side. It's maybe not getting you where you want to go, but passing the ball forward to someone who's not going to be able to do what needs to be done and they'll lose the ball and you'll be on the counter attack is probably more of a pointless pass. Again, it's all subjective. It doesn't mean it's every situation, blah blah blah. But I think that's just interesting to take a quote out of isolation. That's how I interpret that. To me, I don't know if that's your thoughts. You know loads more about coaching and positional play and all that sort of stuff. Is that how they would see it? A pointless pass isn't one that you retain possession and try and build again. It would be passing to someone where you know you're not going to get to where you want to get to.
Well, I guess that's the big part about interpretation, mate. Right? Is that listen, a great example of this, and you saw it a lot in that highlights clip for the weekend. Centre backs played into a midfielder who's got a man right up his backside, basically, and using that player as a wall pass, right? So we can still advance the ball, but it's going back towards the centre back because now there's a space in behind that midfielder who's just drew pressure out. Now, you could argue, is that pointless or not? Well, it's only good if we can expose that space that we've just drawn the pressure from, right? If the opposition don't move anywhere and they literally just stand still in front of their box, you got to do something, right? You have to move the ball somewhere. You can't just dribble at them from 50 yards out. There's obviously situations where making a dribble action in the final third or dribbling inside can find extra things. But when you're talking about actually just building the game, we know what pointless passing looks like. Right? I think we're all fairly well versed in that. Our Broncos teams are really bad for it, where it was you're giving it to the fullback, knowing fine well it's coming back again, right? So the opposition don't have to think there, right? With this team now, I think there's definitely going to be more of an emphasis of passing through the middle. Now, again, if we can have our midfielders receiving the ball in the half turn and it going immediately to strikers, lovely, brilliant, right? But even if it does get to the striker, that's not to say that it immediately has to turn and shoot or turn and go wide and get a cross in. Like, we can live in their half for a bit. We can go back again and maybe try and penetrate somewhere else. I think this is where, when we talk about the understanding, we're so scarred and we're so quick to project what we've saw in the past on what we're seeing now that we just instantly presume it's that, right? Oh, it must be the same, right? We've saw that passage before. What I'm hoping to see with this team is can we get the ball in a final third area, and if it's not on, still have it again. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
need to immediately turn over. And I mentioned
Those,
earlier about that support piece, right?
those waves of attack that we
Yeah,
mention them all the time,
totally.
doesn't it? We're so used to just a once and done. Let's attack, let's swing the ball in. If we score, great. If there's a scramble, we score, great. But it's like a basketball game. But let's turn it into waves of attack, like you said. Yeah. Sorry, when you go.
No, sure. And listen, it was more the point earlier spoke about the support piece from the centre backs and the back line underneath the midfield. It's the same in the midfield and the strikers, right? If we say Asgard and Dio, for example, let's say it's those two, right, are constantly just both running past the striker, right? Well, that looks great for numbers in the box, but what if the striker can't get it to them? Who's he got underneath? Is it just the six? And that's it. That's his only option. Well, we're not going to keep it very much then. So this is where um, you then have to be more aware of, like, well, when we talk about keeping structure, possession, opposition's half. If it is just going back and squaring, yeah, absolutely, that is pointless, right? We can dress it
Yeah.
up however we want. You're not hurting anyone, but if that's to pull someone out of position and you play a quick through pass at the other end of it, then that's how you got to where you wanted to get to. Like I say, I go back to it. That's where in the past we've been probably scarred the supporters, is that we've saw a lot of bluster and movement with the ball, but it was also in a period where players were just basically running around doing what came natural to them. I think there's a lot more structure to what the coaching staff want them or are going to want them to achieve. And it's just going to take us a bit of time to try and figure out what that looks like. Like, I guarantee you, if you spoke to a City fan or even a Celtic supporter or whoever it is whose team has played this way for a amount of time, they could tell you the runs off by heart. They know what's coming, but they're
Yep.
successful because it works. That's why they keep doing it, right? So I think that's the flip side of this. Is I'm looking forward to a time when we know there's a little right wing move that we can build up, and it's good, and we can see it happening. I guess that's the synergy I'm looking for down the road.
Yeah, another thing popped into my head there. How come we concede that goal every time to Celtic? Well,
Yeah,
because they rehearsed it
I'm
every
good
time,
at it.
and we don't,
Yeah.
and we don't rehearse defending it. So yeah, okay. So to sort of sum up there, then is you know a million times more about positional play than me. I've had a bit of spare time recently, and I've watched a fair bit of Russell Martin's games. Like I said, same with scouting players. There's so many factors in there. You can look and see what you think a team has done well or a player has done well in that environment with those players around him, with the coach that he's got at that time in his life. Whether it translates into what we need, I don't know. But go back to what I said at the start. I believe this type of football is what is needed to succeed. You've sort of said that there yourself. If you are a ball dominant team in a league where you are one of the better teams and you've got the financial ability to implement this structure, implement this playing style, bring in the players that suit it, I believe this is one of the better ways to play football and to play winning football. There are not a lot of big clubs out there shitting their way to titles anymore. Those days
Right.
are in the past for a decade or so at most now. So I believe this is the way to go. In terms of Russell Martin and the evolution piece there, I mentioned the Guardiola piece. I wouldn't mind just finishing on I guess some of his evolution that I have my opinion on how I see him or how he has evolved. I don't think he uses positional play just to keep the ball. I think we've sort of covered that there. He said himself it needs to be about courage and intensity. It's not about safe passing, possession for possession's sake. Possessions for possession's sake. He uses it to control space, manipulate structure, dictate games, as we've said. It's probably less about those rigid zones that we mentioned, more about those relationships. Example, you said Jeffrey cutting inside, things might change, going outside. Similarly, if Aaron's plays on the left hand side instead, or vice versa, we might see different things ahead of him. But it's about that retaining that fluidity or flexibility within a structured framework, but not completely structured that it becomes rigid. Um, Also, I think as well, just to touch on, I guess he has changed a lot everywhere. So, well, it depends what you think by a lot, but he certainly evolved. At Swansea, it was that kind of Swansea of old. I think trying to
Yeah.
go back to that, whether it was who was there? It was Roberto Martinez and Michael Laudrup, wasn't it? That sort of couple of
Yeah.
years where they were
Hmm.
like proper positional play, and it was when he was there. It was a 3-5-2, 3-4-2-1, no wingers, obviously back three, two pivots. The fullbacks provided the width when he got to Southampton. Again, I don't know if I'm putting words in my mouth of what I want it to be, but going from a Swansea who are not one of the teams expected to be at the top end of the league every single time. That was what he thought was the best approach for where they were. Moving to Southampton, who very much were that in the Championship, he changed that to back four. Again, I don't see many teams dominating year after year with a very rigid back four with a very rigid back three that has just got three defenders in it that are decent one-on-one and don't really do much going forward. So he changed that to a 4-3-3 there. We started to see elements of a fullback inverting and one staying wide, so we could build up. That midfield box we've spoken about before sort of came in. That single playmaker rather than a double pivot. It was a single pivot. Introduce wingers who stayed high and wide, striker who would drop into the pockets, etc. There is an argument that last season he probably should have changed that more to evolve. I think he acknowledges that himself, and that was the point I mentioned earlier on about maybe bringing in more athletic profiles, being a bit more cynical when you're dealing with those breakaways. You're going from a team who has a load of the ball in the championship to a team that isn't going to dominate as much possession in the leagues and going to have to do a bit more defending. So maybe he should have adapted a little bit more. I take that criticism on board, but I do think there has been a bit more dynamism, a bit more intensity, and a bit more structure, I think, added to the attacking philosophy, evolution, whatever you want to call it, as he's gone through. So what I see that worked at the top of the championship for Southampton is what I see could work here. It's the same scenario, I think. Ball dominant, top of the league, expected to win most games. Probably going to have the best players in the league, if not be there or thereabouts. I think that's how we'll see it here, with hopefully those additions that we mentioned about dark arts, etc. I think that based on what we know just now, we can never really tell, but I think that's a fair summation of where he's been and what we might expect positional play to look like under Russell Martin.
Yeah, and unless I think that the direction of travel for sure is pointing towards the latter there. You know, the Southampton sort of style. I guess just being a different feel, a different sort of part of the league. Like you said, you're not fighting upwards; you are at the top. I think a lot of the times, though, when we talk about the back three piece, obviously it's probably more suited to that level of football in England because a lot of teams will play with two strikers or certainly a midfielder that becomes a striker. Whereas in Scotland, you're typically up against a 5-4-1 or a 4-5-1. That's pretty much it every week, right? They're going to change how they defend, maybe man for man and zonal. But I guess the biggest thing that he'll definitely have to overcome structure regardless is bringing back a fear factor. That's going to be the biggest challenge. And again, how you get that, how you coach that into your players, that feel for being winners, being challengers, thinking that this is our game to win rather than, well, we need to not lose today. You know, that's a huge thing. And while all of these videos have been putting out have been brilliant, I think it's the most connected the fan base has been in terms of just seeing things and feeling like they're part of it. All of the things we're not hearing and not seeing behind the scenes, I can guarantee it's basically mind tricks. It's to getting players into a frame of mind of, all right, what's happened. You now need to think like winners and act like winners. And yes, we're doing all these, you know, we've just spoke for the best part of an hour tonight about the tactical piece. That's lovely. But if you've got boys who don't believe they can carry it out and be successful with it, then, you know, that's all it is. It's just X's and O's and words, basically.
I'm quite interested to see how the opposition react to this, because I think there was certainly an element last year of more attack-minded teams. St Mirren were coming, having a go. The cup defeat, they didn't exactly sit back. Motherwell had an attack-minded manager last year. He's obviously left, and they brought someone else in who's a positional play advocate. But I'm intrigued to see that, because it wasn't. I think teams got to the stage last year where they expected to come to Ibrox and they could dominate the middle of the pitch, which was nuts to me, really. Right. That's not going to be the case now. But what they did last year, I guess, was at times they would go two up, or they'd certainly have a striker and two wingers, because they knew they were fine in the middle and they wanted to add a bit of threat up top. So it'll be interesting to see what they do now. If it'll be more back to the days of just sitting back and us trying to break them down, or if they're got caught between two ideals and think there's a bit of an opportunity. So I think how teams, if it works the way that we hope it does, I think how teams play against us at the start of the season might end up being very different to how they play against us at the end. Okay, so I think we've covered quite a lot there, potentially a bit more than we thought we would, but that was a good chat. Alli, thank you for joining us. Like I said, hopefully this will be regular, but we're not getting ahead of ourselves until we actually see how things work in action. But cheers for coming on.
Absolutely, mate. Fingers crossed everything goes well for the team next couple of weeks, and yeah, we've got some positive things to talk about.
Hopefully. And yeah, as always, any questions on this, any concerns? We've tried to steer away from talking about individual roles within the team or new players or anything like that quite yet. I'd like to see them in competitive action first or I'd like to see some of them, I guess, first of all, before we really start to think about that. But we'll definitely start to look at some of those things over the next couple of weeks and months as well. But any questions about this show, any suggestions or anything you want answered on the next show, where we'll start to look at more detail, I guess, on how things might work on the pitch, potentially looking at set pieces. We've got Mike Williamson in, which I know you've got some thoughts on, Alli, so we can maybe look at some of those points in the next show. But yeah, any of that, let us know in the comments as always, or get in touch with us on Twitter, and we'll add it into next week's show.